Welcome to Restoration. I'm Rabbi Matt. So glad you could join us for this online Shabbat. We are continuing our series today on the other six. Remember, we started the beginning of the year with a series called Completely Other, going through the first four of the Ten Commandments. And now we're doing a series of the other six of the Ten Commandments, leading to the day of Shavuot, which some of you know as Pentecost. And before we jump into the message on do not steal, there's a few things to go over. One, we have a question and answer. Sorry, my kids keep telling me to say Q&A because that's how I wrote it. You know, it's a question and answer. There's a Q&A with Rabbi Matt that you can join. That's me. That you can join on Thursday nights, and you can jump in anytime. The link to register is on our social media. And we would love for you to be a part of live discussions where we go deeper into the message on Thursday nights at 6:30 Pacific Standard Time throughout this series. The conversations have been super fun and engaging, and we get to go much deeper into the message of things I wish I could have put in the message, but then the message would be 7 hours long. There's also the Omer Devotional is starting on May 2nd for the last 14 days of the days of Omer. Today, May 1st, is the 34th day of the counting of the Omer. We count 50 days between Passover and Shavuot. So tomorrow night, Sunday night, May 2nd, we're going to have a devotional every night for the last 14 days of the counting of the Omer. And it'll post around sundown, Seattle time, but be available on Facebook and Restoration app and on shalomseattle.com, wherever you connect with us. You'll be able to track with us as we pray through the last 14 days leading to the day of Shavuot, which many of you know is both the day that God gave the commandments to Moses according to Jewish tradition, and then also the day that the Holy Spirit was given to the Jewish followers of Yeshua in the temple courts in Jerusalem. So it's a big day to celebrate. Because we're getting our services back in order, we are not having a special service for Shavuot, but we do encourage those in our community here in Seattle to take off Monday, the 17th of May from work. If you need a letter, you can send an email to info@shalomseattle.com. And we encourage everyone to take this day with their families. And then actually the following Saturday, May 22nd, we're going to begin our Shabbat gatherings again. They're going to be very scaled down and different, and there's going to be social distancing, and we're still going to wear masks, but we're going to create ways for us to gather, hopefully, starting May 22nd and every Saturday thereafter. Through whenever the Lord calls us all home, and until the next pandemic, I suppose. But for all the time that it's taken for us to of not meeting together, we're just really excited to come back together on May 22nd, and encourage, if you're in the Seattle area, for you to come and join us and celebrate with us. And really, we're going to work toward, in the kind of end of spring and through the summer, towards what we're calling a relaunch of Restoration, because, gosh, it's been 60-something weeks since we've actually met. A lot of things have changed, and we're going to start again and use this time to prepare for the high holiday season, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot, which are really early this year. In fact, Rosh Hashanah is the night of Labor Day, the evening of Labor Day, September 6th. So our goal from May through the end of August is to figure out how to safely meet together and celebrate together, so we can get back to ourselves on this in this coming Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot, which the hardest part for me, maybe for many of you too, has been missing all of the holidays that bring so much joy and not celebrating them together in person. I'm really looking forward to Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot. So Let's jump into the message today, the continuation of the series, The Other Six. As we've said throughout this series, Leviticus 19, verse 1 says, Adonai spoke to Moses, speak to all the congregation of the sons of Israel and tell them, you shall be holy, for I, Adonai, your God, am holy. Now, and we've talked about what that means for us in Hebrew. Is holy is a weird word in English that means a lot of things to a lot of people. But the real translation of the word kadosh would be completely other. So he says, be completely other, for I am completely other. There's nothing in God, there's nothing like God in this creation. He stands outside of it because he created all of it. Within creation, he's made mankind, male and female. We talked about last week in the message of adultery, that in male and female, he literally put the image of God in the words man and woman. So in the combination of them, we would create more images of God. But we're not God. We're only made in his image. But that means in creation, there's nothing like us. And so there's ways that God tells the nation of Israel to be completely other from the nations, and then he tells followers of Yeshua to be completely other from the world that doesn't follow Yeshua. So this idea of holiness and the idea that God is completely other and we are designed to be completely other is the backbone of the Ten Commandments. And we've talked through so far Exodus 20 and verse 12, honor your father and mother, so your days may be long upon the land which Adonai your God is giving you. Do not murder. Do not commit adultery. And today, verse 15, Exodus 20 and verse 15, do not steal. Now, I got to tell you, as I was preparing for the Ten Commandments, I was like, man, murder's going to be fun. I don't mean murder's fun. I mean preaching on murder. Murder's not fun. Preaching on murder will be fun. Preaching on adultery will be fun. Like, all these are like, and I was like, do not steal. I don't know. I'll figure it out. It just doesn't sound very exciting because I haven't stolen a candy bar from 7-Eleven since I was in 6th grade. In fact, I remember in 5th grade, there was this auto parts store in Suffolk County, and I would ride my bike over there, and I realized that my hands and my arms were small enough that I could stick my hand up the Coke machine and pull Coca-Colas down. And of course, in my generous nature, I never just stole for myself one Coke. I would take a bunch of Cokes for all my friends. Until I got caught. And I asked my mom the other day, do you remember the auto parts? She was like, oh yeah, I do. And I said, what's your recollection of that whole? She said, well, funny enough, I don't think you thought it was wrong because your arm fit. And you just figured if my arm fit, then there was a flaw in the design. And that's not on me. That's on the people who made the machine. We're talking about, how old are you in 5th grade? I was 9, 10 years old. And I was already justifying and being generous with what I took, because I wasn't just taking for myself. So it's I haven't done that kind of thing. I haven't stolen since 5th grade. But then you have to wrestle with, what does do not steal really mean in the text, and how has it been understood? And we've talked about throughout the Completely Other series, and then now in this series, The Other Six, that the design of the Ten Commandments is the first 4 are about idolatry and our relationship with God, and the other 6 are about our relationship with people. Or as Yeshua put all of this, Yeshua sums up all of the commandments, as we've said through this series, in Matthew 22, verse 37. And he said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first, the greatest commandment. And the second is like it, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. The entire Torah and the prophets hang on these 2 commandments. So it's like the 10 commandments sum up all of the commandments. And these 2 that Yeshua gives sum up the 10. So you break the Ten Commandments into two parts: the commandments that have to do with loving God with all of our heart, with all of our soul, and all of our strength, and the commandments that have to do with loving our neighbor as ourselves. So Exodus 20, verse 15, 3 words: do not steal. What does it mean to steal? Or what does the word steal actually mean? And the Hebrew word is actually deception. It's to steal away. It's really, the word steal is really equal to take. It's taking something that doesn't belong to you. The way the rabbis have understood what a thief is for a long time now in the writings of the rabbis is that do not steal is actually a reference to do not kidnap. The reason why it's a reference to do not kidnap is, well, Deuteronomy 24 and verse 7 says, if a man is caught kidnapping any of his brothers from the sons of Israel, whether he treats him like property or sells him, the kidnapper must die. So you're to purge the evil from among your midst. Now, we've gone over some of the others, like do not murder and do not commit adultery, which come right before do not steal, and they have a death penalty to them. And so the idea of the rabbis was, well, according to the Torah, there's only one kind of theft that requires a death penalty, and that would be kidnapping someone else. Or even in the New Testament, it's referenced, Paul in his letter to Timothy references slave trading, which is a form of kidnapping. 1 Timothy 1 and verse 8, he says, we know the Torah is good if one uses it legitimately, and knowing that the Torah is not given for the righteous, but it's given for the lawless and rebellious. And then he gives a list of who the lawless and rebellious are. He says it's for the ungodly and the sinful. It's for the unholy and the worldly. It's for those who kill their fathers and mothers, for murderers, for sexual immoral. Interesting, right? Sounds like the Ten Commandments. Murderers and sexually immoral and homosexuals and slave traders, liars and perjurers, and for anything else that opposes sound teaching, in keeping with what was entrusted to me, the glorious good news of blessed God. But Paul's saying, look, if the Torah is used right, we know that the Torah is not actually used for those who are righteous, but the Torah is actually for those who are lawless and rebellious and need laws and need to understand what sin is. And that includes, and he starts with the Ten Commandments, and then he's like, after do not steal, he's like, and you know anything else that opposes, like you guys know the rest, right? You know the other ones. But it's interesting that the way he understands do not steal and the way he explains it to Timothy is slave traders, liars, and perjurers. That there's this element of theft in the scriptures that references the stealing of another person and lying and perjuring oneself, which is connected to the next commandment, next week's message, which is not bearing false witness. So stealing in the commandments, if murder is about your neighbor's life and adultery is about your neighbor's wife, no, those rhyme, or spouse, then the idea of not stealing has to do with their goods, with their money and their possessions. And why does God care about people's money and possessions? Stealing is not just taking a Mountain Dew at an auto parts store in Holbrook, New York, when you're in 5th grade. Stealing is not just grabbing something that doesn't belong to you and walking away with it. I recently went down to our garage to go bike riding with my kids, and my bike was gone. And I instantly was transported back to when my bike was stolen in 6th grade and how devastated I felt. And I stood there and I saw the bike lock cut in half on the ground. My bike's not there, but gratefully my kids' bikes were there, which was much more important to me. And when something is taken from you, there's like a violation of, man, that's terrible. Why would somebody take my stuff? But stealing is not only theft. in the scriptures, it's also deceit and it's fraud, and it often includes financial injustice and oppression. It involves schemes that we create in inaccurate scales in the marketplace that would weigh scales one way or the other for the advantage of some and the disadvantage of others. And it involves debt, and it involves slavery, and it involves all the commandments that come around these things. It's like do not steal it is like adultery was for the list of sexually immoral acts, not just do not commit adultery, but there's a whole list of sexual sins. So do not steal in the Ten Commandments has a whole list of things that God regards as stealing when it comes to people's money and possessions. There's many commandments about these things, like not to steal money, or the courts must implement punitive measures against a thief, or each individual must ensure his scales and weights are accurate, or not to commit injustice with scales and weights, or not to possess inaccurate scales and weights even if they are not for use, not to move a boundary marker to steal someone's property. Actually, when I was dating Laura, who grew up on a farm in Minnesota, and I went to meet her parents, and we walked through the 70 acres of the pasture, and we got to the end of the pasture, and they showed me the land marker, and I was like, the land marker? I've never seen a land marker. I grew up in the city. We don't have land markers. And I thought about these verses that I had read, my whole life, to not move a boundary marker to steal someone's property, because if a marker is put in a place to set a boundary and you move it, then there's deception, deceit that's involved in growing your land or somebody else's land while somebody else's shrinks through deception. One commandment specifically is to not kidnap, or to not rob openly, or not withhold wages, or fail to repay a debt. We don't like that because we don't like that we're in debt to other people. And but there are commandments about us making sure if you have debt that you have to repay it. And there's ramifications in the scriptures if you don't repay debt. We're not to covet and scheme to acquire another's possessions. We're not to desire another's possession. We're to return the robbed object or its value. You're not to ignore a lost object when something is found. Deuteronomy 22 in verse 3. Talks about if you see somebody's ox on the road, you don't just leave it there. Return it to its owner. In our idea sense, it's like if you see a wallet on the ground, return the wallet to somebody. At least bring it to the police station, and don't take the money out of it first and put it in your pocket and then return it. You return it because it was lost. You're supposed to return lost objects, and there's all kinds of courts. So when you go through all of these things, of all the aspects of commandments that are included in stealing, it's really easy for us just to say, look, I don't steal. This isn't a big deal for me. But the truth is, there's all kinds of ways that we use theft and deceit and fraud and financial injustice and oppression and scheming and inaccurate scales and debt and slavery in our own lives. All you have to do is bring up paying taxes and how people pay their taxes or don't pay their taxes. And you can find all kinds of justifications and loopholes for what you should do and what you shouldn't do. But we don't keep commandments to find loopholes. We don't have commandments to find justifications to not keep them. We have them so that we understand what God calls sin, what God calls injustice. It's interesting, the next two commandments over the next 2 weeks are do not bear false witness and do not covet. Then it's a whole list of, I can honestly say I've never coveted my neighbor's donkey, but it's in the list. And the reason why it's in the list is because bearing false witness and coveting your neighbor's possessions actually lead to stealing. You first, desire what your neighbor has, And the fear is that the desire would turn into the need for something. And if you can't afford it, then you're willing to bear false witness, to lie and use deceit and fraud to take what doesn't belong to you. Maimonides said he viewed stealing as one step in the progression from covetous desire to murder. And when the person who owns a coveted item resists its unjust acquisition, the thief resorts to violence and may become guilty of murder. So you find like these 10 commandments are 10 words are just all connected to each other. They, in some sense, lead to one another because they involve. In fact, I was thinking about how all the other commandments are actually forms of stealing. See, not honoring your father and mother is stealing a blessing, and not keeping the Sabbath steals rest, and murdering someone steals life, and adultery steals the faithfulness of someone else, and not carrying God's name well steals God's reputation. Worshiping other images steals God's glory. Not giving, not tithing, not participating in community with giving is stealing from what belongs to the Lord. I know there's some of you watching and maybe a part of Restoration or maybe other congregations where some of us grew up in systems where congregations and leaders misuse the idea of giving and used it to guilt people and to hurt people. But the idea is not what people often say, which is your congregation just wants my money. Actually, an opportunity in community to give our money back to support each other in a community that God designed so that we could grow together and care for one another with each other's resources. Like, it's all a part of a design, and we get ourselves wrapped up in what we think we like or we don't like, and we end up stealing from what it really is. So this idea of stealing, do not steal, is really about goods. It's about our neighbor's money possession. We already talked about Leviticus, and Yeshua quoted Leviticus as 19:18 as two of the greatest commandments: love your neighbor as yourself. But if you look at the other parts of Leviticus 19, they're fleshed out in a few of the verses. Leviticus 19:11 says you're not to steal, you're not to lie, you're not to deceive one another. Verse 13 says you're not to oppress your neighbor or rob him. The wages of a hired servant are not to remain with you all night till the morning, meaning pay somebody what they're owed when they do the work. Leviticus 19, verse 35 and 36 says you must not be dishonest in judgment, in measurements of length, weight, or of quantity. You have to be honest. You have to have honest, balanced, honest weights, honest bushel measure, and an honest gallon. I am Adonai your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Now, when God puts that at the end of a sentence, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, he's reminding us, the Jewish people, that we were slaves in Egypt and he sent Moses to set us free. And if we are worthy of freedom, so is everyone. And using dishonest measurements is a way to deceive somebody into paying more than they ought to pay. God's saying, you were slaves in Egypt. You don't now want to become slaves or make slaves of other people by the way that you live. Why? Because in this same chapter comes the idea, Leviticus 19:18, to love your neighbor as yourself. So, part of you, part of me, loving our neighbor, is caring about their money and their possessions. So I'm going to give you 3 reasons why we don't steal. We don't steal because, the first, we don't steal because everything they have is from God. And we don't want to steal from God. Ecclesiastes 8, verse 15, I preached at the end of last year, I preached a series on wisdom, and Ecclesiastes is typically understood as kind of a depressing book because Solomon keeps saying, I've seen everything under the sun, and there's all this labor and there's all this work, but then when you die, it all gets passed to somebody else, and it's it's all meaningless. But the word in Ecclesiastes is not actually meaningless. It's smoke. And he's saying it's all going to poof, be gone. But he said in Ecclesiastes 8, verse 15, which I think since the end of last year has become an important verse for me to remember. He said, so I recommend enjoyment. I love this. I recommend enjoyment because there's nothing better for humanity under the sun except to eat, drink, and enjoy it. So this joy will accompany him in his labor all the days of his life that God gives him under the sun. And the idea is God has given us work to do. And in the work that we do, we provide for ourselves. And in the provisions that we have for ourselves, we're able to eat and drink and enjoy the things that our hard work has produced. But we also, as followers of Yeshua, realize that our hard work by itself did not only produce what we have, but our abilities that have been given to us by God to make money and to earn money, that everything you have and everything your neighbor has is from God, whether they acknowledge him or not. It's from God. And the reason why God gives us money and possessions is to eat, to drink, and to enjoy it. Because joy should accompany our labor. Now, I realize some of you hate your jobs, and I understand how that plays out for some people, but the hope is that you do something you love. And for a lot of people, we do what we do to earn money, and it's the eating and the drinking and the joy of all that our resources can be used for that makes all the hard labor we do worth it. That we could enjoy our time with our family. I don't know, early on in the pandemic, I felt bad telling people that I've kind of enjoyed the pandemic. Obviously not ignoring that many people have been suffering in this pandemic. But I think for a lot of people, it also eliminated a lot of the parts of our lives that we didn't like before, like traffic, commuting, and less time with the people that we actually care about. And I know from my own self, like I talk to many people who are single, who the isolation of this pandemic has been really difficult because they're even more isolated. And I know from my own self and from people who have families that at this point, like a year and a half into the pandemic, we wish we were single and that we had some isolation. Like everybody's got something going on, but ultimately it's given us time and to enjoy and more time to enjoy the fruit of our labor. So we don't steal from people because we have to recognize that everything they have is from God. The second is we don't steal because money and possessions are gifts from God for our joy. I love this prayer. The writer of Proverbs 30 prays. He says in Proverbs 30, verse 7, 2 things I ask of you, do not refuse me before I die. Keep falsehood and lies far from me. Give me neither poverty nor riches, but feed me with my allotted bread, lest I become satisfied and deny you and say, who is the Lord? Or lest I become poor and steal and profane the name of God. Now, he says, I pray that you keep falsehood and lies from me. We're going to talk about that next week, more specifically, and do not bear false witness. Then he says, I don't want to be rich and I don't want to be poor. I just want you to feed me with what you've allotted for me. Now, this is part of the struggle of coveting, we're going to talk about in 2 weeks, is that we have what we have, and what we have is given from God for our joy. But what my neighbor has, I kind of like better. What some celebrities have, I really wish I could have that. And then we start to judge each other on what we purchase or what we don't purchase, or the things that people enjoy or the things that people don't enjoy, or the kind of car that they drive, or the shoes that they wear, or the amount of their, how much their clothes cost, or how much. And we start to judge people, and really the judgment is coming from a place of jealousy and coveting, or this idea that somehow I have a better handle on what the life of a follower of Yeshua should be like, because I understand that I should never be rich, and neither should you. Or believing that God has destined everyone for poverty, or that God has destined everyone for great success, or God, either side. I think that the writer of Proverbs 30 is saying, look, the reason why I don't want either is not because there's anything wrong with poverty, and not because there's anything wrong with being wealthy. I just want to make sure that I don't ever get to a place where I'm so wealthy that I forget who you are, and I start to celebrate me and my great accomplishments and all the hard work that I did that created this kingdom that I have around me. Or I don't want to ever become so poor that I actually feel like I have to steal and profane the name of God. Well, how do you profane the name of God in stealing? Well, often. The Proverbs also talk about this, that nobody is angry at someone for stealing if they're hungry and they'll die without food. But if a thief gets caught, they have to pay far more than what they stole. And we steal when we're desperate because there's a lack of provision, and a lack of provision, we do something, we take action for ourselves because God's not providing, or nobody else is helping, or nobody else is doing for me, so I have to steal. And the writer of Proverbs is saying, I don't ever want to come to a place where I feel like I have to steal and then profane the name of God by taking fruits of someone else's labor for myself. So it's really not rich, and it's not poor. It's that we're provided for. It's I love that he says, give me neither poverty nor riches, but feed me with my allotted bread. Well, that begs the question, what has been allotted to you by God? And how do you use it? Whatever you have, you use it well. I remember sitting in a seminar with Pastor Rick Warren, and he was talking about the money that he had earned from one of his books that has, at this point, Purpose Driven Life has sold over 50 million copies, which is totally outrageous and ridiculous. And he said tens of millions of dollars coming. And there are many of you who are sitting in this audience listening to me talk, saying, if I had that much money, I would give it all too. Because what Rick Warren is famous for, part of what he's well known for, is he paid back 20 years of salary as a pastor, first 20 years. And since, I think, 20 years or 30 years, has taken no salary from his church to be the lead pastor. He also did what J.C. Penney, the guy, not the store, actually called reverse tithing. That he had been given so much by God that he lived off of 10% and gave 90% away. And so Pastor Rick just said in this seminar, I know some of you are sitting there thinking, if I had the money, I would do that too. Problem is, not doing it now. And it struck me, like at the core of who I am, to say, no, I can't expect God to give me more so I can give away more if I'm not doing anything now to help. Pirkei Avot, the sayings of our fathers, rabbis say it this way: who is rich? One who appreciates what he has. Who is rich? Not the one with all the money. It's not the one with all the stuff. It's not the one with all the stuff that everyone else covets. It's the one who appreciates what he has, because money and possessions are gifts from God for joy. Now, we have to be careful, and we have to weigh. We have to be good stewards of what we've been given, and we have to weigh how we use our money for ourselves and for others. But at the base, we don't steal because everything we have is from God. We don't steal because money and possessions are gifts from God for joy. And I was thinking about just the kind of negative sense of the commandment, right? Do not steal. Well, I said before, steal really means take. So it's do not take. Well, do not take what? I think we've defined the what is goods. It's the money and possessions of other people. Well, why are we to not take the money and possessions of other people? Because they're from God for those people out of their hard work to enjoy. So if the negative sentence is do not steal, I think the positive flip side, do not steal, really can translate for us as followers of Yeshua. The commandment can be said this way in a positive sense: help others succeed. Do not steal equals help others succeed. We don't steal, third point, because we help others succeed. Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 28 says, the one who steals must no longer steal. Instead, he must work, doing something useful with his own hands, that he may have something to share with the one who has need. Now, this isn't the same as driving by a Home Depot and going, why don't those people just work? Okay, you're just a jerk. Okay, I am too. I get it. This isn't look at poor people and go, I wish they would just work. That's not what Paul's saying. He's saying, those of you who have stolen before, as followers of Yeshua, and this is in a longer list of how to be imitators of God, but right in there, he says, verse 27, the one who stole should no longer steal. Not only that, they should work. And in doing something useful with their hands, so they might have something to share with the one who has need. So we're designed to work hard. We're designed to build. We're designed to save. We're designed to really build wealth. I think this is one of my favorite things about a guy like Dave Ramsey, who designs programs and budgets and concepts to help us be good stewards of what we have so that you can build wealth, which is not against Scripture. Take care of yourself and of your own family so that you can be helpful to other people. You can help others succeed. I've been on this long journey of not knowing a whole lot about finances, and Laura and I going through the Financial Peace University about 6 years ago, in the process of learning how to build a budget and putting cash in envelopes and not sneaking cash out of the envelopes that Laura puts in there that she doesn't know about. For myself, and going through this process of not only are we going to pay off debt, but we're going to start to build savings. And in building savings, there's going to come a point where we're going to be able to give money away. Now, I'm generous all the way back to when I was stealing Coca-Colas and passing them out to my friends. Like, my desire was always to share whatever I had. Okay, but I was sharing out of things that weren't actually mine. And as I grew older, in college, my parents would come to visit. They'd give me like money, and I'd go, who wants pizza? And then we'd all go down to Turiello's in Nyack, New York, and we get pizza, and I'd buy everybody pizza. And then I'd remember I have to buy books and other things. And so this process of learning about the idea of money and the good stewardship of money and how to save and build savings, that it's taken us about 6 years. In that process, we paid off debt, which was a huge celebration a few years ago. And then we started to build money to have for ourselves and the savings, and now we're in a place where we feel the most secure we've ever felt, and it's given us opportunities to take some of that money and help people with that money. which was always the desire of my heart. But I ended up often helping people and in the process hurting myself because I didn't have enough to care for myself. So Paul's saying, look, for those who steal, you don't steal, but also you should work and do something useful with your hands. So you have something to share with the one who has need. So we don't steal, we work. And we don't steal because everything they have is from God, and money and possessions are gifts from God for joy. And we, those of us who say we follow Yeshua, don't steal because we want to help others. And the reason for work, the reason for hard work, and the reason for thinking through all these things and being good stewards of the resources that God has given us is because money and possessions are fruit of our labor. And we're to enjoy the provisions that God has given us. But part of the joy of God's provision is share with those who are in need. We can find people who are stealing because they feel like they have to. And I know what that feels like. So let me help you not steal anymore by helping you get out of work. Yeshua said it this way in John 10 and verse 10. He builds this comparison and he says, look, the thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. I have come. They may have life, have it to the full. And I think as followers of Yeshua, we don't want to be thieves that come to steal, kill, and destroy. We want to be people who have life, live it to its fullness, and are able to share what we have. One of the coolest things about this whole pandemic has been our Helping Others Fund. Helping Others Fund at Restoration is a fund to help others. That's why we call it the Helping Others Fund. And all throughout, starting at the beginning of this pandemic, we started asking people to give into that fund, and people have been so generous in our community, have been so generous over this last year and a half. That money in the Helping Others Fund keeps growing, and we keep giving it away, and then the fund grows some more, and then we're able to give it away, and the fund grows some more, and we've never depleted the fund because we want to have money available to give to people who are in need, and we've been able to give to so many people in the Seattle area and in our community who have real need, that others in our community have been so generous and so gracious to give in this crazy difficult season. We do it as a community. We're actually 10% of everything that comes into Restoration goes out to other ministries and organizations. And every quarter, we give thousands of dollars to organizations here in Seattle and throughout the United States and in Israel that are invested in helping people, all different kinds. And there's so much joy in giving out of what God has given us, that when we provide for ourselves, we also want to help others succeed. So 3 words: do not steal. Turn into a mandate for us as followers of Yeshua. And not just, it would be easy to just say, I don't steal, because I don't take things that don't belong to me. Or we could flip the negative, make sure we actually don't steal, try to look at all the parts of our lives when it comes to like our taxes and our time cards at work and the time we put in and the resources that we have and the way that we use them and how we steward the money, like making sure that in all of these ways we're not stealing. But then we flip around the negative commandment, do not steal. As followers of Yeshua, we do what Yeshua calls us to do and to be. What he did for us, what he does for us, is to help others succeed. Thieves come to steal, kill, and destroy. But we have life. We can have it to the fullest. show people what it means to live followers of a God who would give up himself as a sacrifice for us to call us to greatness. Let me pray for you. Lord God, we pray that you would reveal to us in these times the places where we need to be better stewards of resources that you've given us. We are grateful to live in a country that has so many more resources than any country has ever had in the history of the world. And that you've given us those resources, not just for us and for our sakes, although you've given it to us to enjoy and to live and to not just work, but to use the resources from our hard work to enjoy life. You've called us. Lord, I pray to help us become more and more people whose desire is to help others. Pray these things in Yeshua's name. Next week, we're going to talk about the commandment of do not bear false witness, which is often translated as do not lying, but like all of these other commandments, is so much harder in the way we understand. It's simple. Shabbat Shalom. I love you. See you next week.